Hey,
Here we are.
that
By magic.
that track, Michael, I so adore it.
Oh, thank
Tell
you.
tell tell me about it. So
Well,
that's
that
you and Rachel. You are
of
half of the
course,
Darkling Hour.
I am half. Yeah, I like. Yeah, we're definitely half, if not less. And with the very talented Rachel McCarthy, who is the singer you hear there, and we co-write these songs under the name of the Darkling Air. And yeah, that was the single of our second record. That's called Octogenarian Mermaid, from the Ancestor album. Yeah, and I guess when we wrote that song, well, Rachel does an awful lot of sea swimming, but when we come up with the melody for that song, we used to come into the studio with ideas for
Uh-huh.
songs. And long story short, one week we come in and played a thing on my phone and said, "Well, I think I like this little melody." And Rachel had exactly the same melody that during the week we'd both come up with completely independently of each other, just for the first maybe 5 or 6 lines of the verse. But when we put them into the computer to start going, well, we took it as a sign we better work on this. So they were in the same key. So we took it as a sign that we should definitely write this song, and that became Octogenary Mermaid that you
I
just heard.
remember you telling me that story, and it's worth repeating. So you and Rachel both independently
Yeah,
came up with the same melody in the same
yeah.
key for
And,
about 5 or 6 lines of the verse.
yeah, and you know, and anyone that writes songs, as you will know, I mean, the chances of doing that are so rare. And you know, I'm not necessarily a big believer in kind of fate or anything like that, but I kind of went, well, this is really weird, and we took it as a sign. And but the fact that they were in the same key was so bizarre, you know,
Yeah.
and we were like, well, this is so weird. So that's where that song came from.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, the piano that we hear in that recording, is that the
Hmm.
piano that I'm using
That
for
is
the playing through the records every other week.
the very piano. Yeah, that
Yeah, I
is
thought
the
I
piano.
recognized it because it
That
has this
it's
lovely wavery kind of beautifulness about it.
I found it in a shop second hand in Dundalk some years ago, and I bought it in a space of about 15 minutes. I was on my way back, and I actually bought it to produce Foy Vance's record, "The Joy of Nothing,"
Excellent album.
and I took that piano from Dundalk and got him to deliver it straight to the Tommy McLaughlin's studio in Attica, which you will know. Some
Yeah,
people listening will, I'm sure, will know. And because he didn't have an upright piano yet, or he didn't have a piano yet, because he was just building a new studio. And
this is Tommy Studio in Donegal,
that's right, Attica
kind of
Audio in Donegal.
which the Villagers records,
That's right.
kind of a couple of them have been made there.
That's right,
Yeah,
absolutely. And villagers and all sorts of people now from
yeah.
Pillow Queens. And then that piano stayed there for a while. I used it with Luxatal Sing. And then Bell X1 borrowed it for a while and used it on some recordings. And then it's made its way to Ardra, where we used it on some more records. And then it's back at Bangor now in my studio, where you are performing on it and
Yeah,
recording on it, and also the Darkland Air. So yeah, it's been doing the rounds, that little upright, for some years now.
excellent.
Yeah.
Well, we're chatting tonight about Under the Dark Cloth,
Yeah.
and which was recorded in 2011, I think, was it? Or 12,
I believe that's
11?
right. I
I
think
think it
we
said 11.
From what I have a poster somewhere, and it says March 2011 for the New York performance
Okay.
which was probably before the record was made, right? And I think it was
Yeah.
that year then, probably. I think it is technically, yeah, must have been around this time in 2011 that we recorded it with the RT
Okay.
Concert Orchestra. Would that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, that might. So let's scroll back about a year before that, or certainly the interim before actually being in New York.
Hmm.
So I'll describe the background to how it came about, the actual kind of um, idea of it. But what do you remember from the demos,
Yeah,
and because I was coming up, I would get a song and then come up to your studio and with different people and put
yeah.
down an idea. So what do you remember from that time?
Yeah, I mean, I remember we were. I at that point was living in my I had a wee apartment in Donegal in County Down, and I remember you coming over. I remember Boo Herding coming over, and I remember a lot of writing going on in the front room, and I had a little kind of setup in the back room of the house, and I would kind of record little demos and then start working on some arrangements, which were initially those were. I think it was initially the idea was to make a project that was to be performed string quartet and piano. Isn't that correct? So,
Yeah.
but I mean, but I remember the kind of. I remember you writing Cherry Blossom Girl. I think it was one of the very first songs I heard, and that's the thing that really piqued my initial kind of foray into what that record was going to be. And it was a very evocative kind of picture of, I don't know, the picture of Cherry Blossom Girl itself, and we could see that, and it was kind of, that song really kind of put across that wintry, snowy Central Park scene, and it had a real kind of intimate and interesting kind of angle, but still kind of had a heartfelt thing going on and very honest. And I think that peaked. I think that sort of set the tone in a strange way for it to be, at that point, just strings and piano for that suite of songs, let's say, you know. And that was one of the first things we kind of worked on. I remember you and Boo sitting in the front room working through various songs at that point, and they were changing and chopping day to day, of course. And that was interesting to watch, you know.
Yeah, maybe we can, Paul, we can begin to have the record playing. I'll explain the background of kind of where the whole kind of concept of the thing came from. So I'd done a gig in New York, and well, thinking about now the kind of time scale. So it was 2011 we did it in New York. So it was probably 2010, probably a full year before that. I was playing at a festival called Crack Fest in New York, which is not about drugs, but it's about having the crack, as they say in our part of the world.
Obviously, a festival of Irish origin, perhaps, that one.
Yeah, you know. Yeah. So they would have different acts from here going over to play, and so I played that night and was then having some drinks in the Scratcher bar. Michael, you will know that.
I do.
You know it?
I think I've been in the Scratcher bar in New
Okay,
York.
so the Scratcher in New York, is it Lower East Side or
I believe so.
Yeah.
From what I remember.
Okay.
Everyone remembers going there. I don't think many people remember leaving.
You can check in any time you like. But famous for music actually is the main thing. I think one of the guys that runs it used to be involved in Shanae bar, which famously Jeff Buckley performed at. I think, keep me right here if I'm
right, yeah.
meandering or not. But so we went, a lot of kind of people from here, this part of the world, when they play in New York, would end up kind of descending on the Scratcher after their various gigs, and you would never know who you're going to run into. But anyway, so I was there after the gig, and these two girls come up to me afterwards, Jeanette O'Keefe and Ashley Williams, and they said, "Oh, hi, we were at your gig tonight. I'm wondering, are you free in the morning? Would you be up for coming to visit us at the Met Museum? Because we have something we'd like to discuss with you." And I was like, okay. I thought, well, I might get into the Met Museum for free. Yes.
Free tickets and lasagna and chips for lunch.
or at least some sort of fancy croissant, Michael.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Well, it's the Met. It's the Met after all.
Yeah. So, thought, let's do that and see what it's about. So went the next late morning, fortunately, and met them, and they basically pitched to me the idea that they were going to be showing a whole series of photographs of three kind of very important figures in art photography: Alfred Stieglitz, Edward Steichen, and Paul Strand. And they were going to be showing their photography in the museum. Would I be interested in some way responding to this work? And seemed like a really interesting idea. And they showed me some of the photographs and these incredibly atmospheric photos. And so I said, yeah, I'll think about it. Came home. They sent me the files of PDFs of loads of these photos. And that was the starting point.
Well, it had to be the clincher, didn't it? Because I sort of defy anyone with an interest in the visual arts or any kind of artistry to look at those photographs and not think, I've got an opportunity to create something in the Met Museum with these photographs. I mean, it was a fantastic kind of thing to happen,
Yeah.
you know, and a once in a lifetime chance to make something like that as well, I guess, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, it was completely open ended at that point as to what it would be, and it wasn't even a stipulation that it would be a concert there, or that, I mean, string quartet was never mentioned. That was something that an idea that kind of grew.
Sure.
Probably wasn't even the initial idea from the first demo. Is probably something thinking about yourself and what you do, and it just I can imagine that maybe working. So
Yeah.
So another thing that around this time that as I began to think about writing for it was this fella Boo Herding that I'd come across a couple of times, and I thought I'd really love to work with him. And I remember pitching the idea to him. I'd probably drunk a bottle of wine or so, and somehow found the courage then to send him an email, saying, "Would you be? I've got this thing, this possible commission. Would you be interested in being involved in that?" And can't remember if it was that evening or the next day. I got a response anyway saying, "Yeah, I'd be up for it." And so he came over to Belfast, and for the first time our meeting was in the OES Centre, and I used to have a writing room there. And in the OES Centre, Boo, who I really respected as a songwriter, and I'd seen him play, and I'm really chuffed that he was up for this. There we are sitting with I'd bought a book of images of Alfred Stieglitz and these people, and we were looking through this book together, and a lot of them were like nudes and things, and after a while both of us realized that we're two men sitting in this room looking through a book of nudes together, and we don't really know each other. It's in quite a small room, and I think I said to him, "This is a bit weird." And he said, "Yes, it is," and we started laughing, and that kind of broke the ice.
A lot of George O'Keefe.
Yeah.
We saw a lot of George O'Keefe that week.
I'm seeing some of Phil now. But
there he is.
He's not nude.
The minute that you mentioned nudes, I felt like it was.
This is me. This is my moment.
Yeah,
they need me.
Trigger word.
They nude me.
I thought I would just dive in before you started to go to individual songs. Just A, say hello to everybody, and B, just to remind you that my role here is to facilitate your questions, and we'd love.
Yes. Put some questions on the Q&A, by the way. You can ask us about anything to do with this record. So
it's over there.
About the record, about Michael in general, but specifically about this record. I don't want to spoil the flow, but somebody has asked Michael. Jackie Dickinson has asked if you can share a little bit about your approach to orchestral arrangement. What's your background? How have you become the king of orchestral arrangement?
Well, I would love to know the answer as well. If anyone can make me the king of that would be amazing. But meanwhile, I'll endeavour to answer the question. I guess I always say that the most interesting thing about when you sit with any song to start an orchestral arrangement, that there's a problem that every single arranger has, is that someone has just handed you this massive palette of like 20,000 colours and shapes and kind of forms, and somehow you have to stick lots of those shapes and forms and colours onto a song which already has its own form and beauty, and just try not to mess it up. And I mean, I know that sounds like a very simple, basic way, but that is my first and foremost kind of thought about any song, is to kind of go, well, particularly when you have so much at your disposal and such a range of instruments, from if it's a symphony orchestra, you've kind of 90 players, or if you've this orchestra with 65 or 63, and you're sort of thinking, well, we just try to keep the first and foremost to keep the point of the song across and keep just enhancing that. So that becomes your first problem. But then I think every arranger has a different approach, but for me it feels like working out the kind of basic building blocks of what group of instruments you hear. For me, if I hear one song, I might hear a kind of brass focused, and behind us right now we can hear Rita, and you can hear an awful lot of brass and tubular bells and wind instruments, and it begins with strings, but that was a song that really suited itself in terms of it became nearly kind of Danny Elfman kind of proportions in the end of arrangement, where it would be a very big kind of brass thing. But I think that in terms of my own background and how you become an arranger, I guess it was just something I always was interested in. I did study music at university, so I went to Queen's University 20 something years ago, and as part of that I studied composition, and although at the same time that was a very classical background, and that was useful to me as an arranger to learn that formality and learn those things. But at the same time, I played in bands. I'm from Donegal originally, and I was playing in bands, and there were folk bands and everything, and jazz bands, and I think I was playing in bars since I was about 13, and I think that was kind of a ground in arrangement in itself, even if it's just for 2 or 3 players of varying kind of instruments and ability. Or I think you start with that nucleus, but also the input of not just the formality of classical music, but the kind of maybe an appreciation and understanding of various types of music. But my father was a huge American country fan, and we would have listened to everything from Hank Williams and Johnny Cash in the car all the day. And then my brother was a New Order and Joy Division fan, so he would be hammering me with his vinyl. And then in the midst of all that, we'd be playing music and listening to film music. And I remember I went to an orchestra performance by the Ulster Orchestra when I was about 11 on one of their outreach programs in Strabane, in the Melmount Centre in Strabane, which was basically a big community hall of it, and Evelyn Glennie was performing. And I remember watching Evelyn Glennie. It was a well-known percussionist.
Okay.
He was and still is performing. She is profoundly deaf, as it happens, but she performs as a classical percussionist, and she is amazing talent. But I remember
I think I've seen her on YouTube.
You may have seen her on television, and the interesting thing for me was it felt like this big machine that I really wanted to know how it worked. So it's like, do you just feed paper in the front and music comes out the back? And that's the way I kind of thought about it. And I thought, I don't really know what it is yet, but I want to learn. And that started a journey of just learning about and it started with strings, because that was a simple sort of 4-part way to go, well, violin 1, violin 2, viola and cello. And then once I'd done enough string arrangements, I was branching out into other things. So I think it's a combination of formal learning and those rules and things that you know, but a lot of it for us in my field of work is interfacing maybe those classical structures that exist with orchestras, but interfacing them into a crossover world of what we do and sort of maybe more contemporary pop or kind of indie music or whatever we want to call it.
Well, I think you're incredibly placed within the music world, Michael, for something I really love about what you do is that you have this understanding of orchestral arrangements and how instruments kind of sound, how they work together, but also you have another foot, as you say, in the kind of rock pop sensibilities, and like playing in a pub or playing in a big festival, playing in whatever it might be, and the ability to kind of make those things not seem like alien to each other, but okay, these can work together in a much more interesting way than, okay, we're going to play a pop song with just this big string pad underneath it, but it's actually exploiting the different dynamics or the different melodies or whatever it is to heighten them.
Well, I like to think that you certainly try not to just tag strings or orchestras onto pop bands. I think the most success. Yeah, it's just really you just horrible. Get this really weird thing that's just you just know that and I think that it has to feel like everything is playing a part, and that's the same thing. For any piece of music, everything has to be working towards just putting that song across. And that ultimately is where you need to start. The quality of a song is the most important thing to any good arrangement, I always say. It's very hard to do a great arrangement of a bad song, That's
polishing the turd, Mike.
Yeah,
Phil's there. Hey,
there
Phil.
he is.
Before you go into individual songs, Dawn Salisbury's asked a useful general question, which I think takes us into that. It says, when you saw each photo, how did you decide whether the song would be upbeat or slow? There's a variety of styles on the album. I just wondered what makes you decide the style. that felt like a good general question.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, Don. Um, there's a somewhat arbitrary nature to going at any creative process, I suppose, in that you might, depending who you're with, the mood that you're in, the instruments that you have to hand, what's missing to in the record, will kind of lure you or push you in a particular direction. So, for example, the first song we wrote for this record was actually Dancing Trees. It was probably the afternoon of that awkward exchange between Boo and I in the OES Centre. And the Dancing Trees was the first thing, which was this quite, slow, contemplative thing. And the next time we wrote together, I think, was in Glasgow, and we were both there in between other things we were doing, and we wrote Hand of Man, and that was like partly inspired by I think the photograph actually also influenced like Dancing Trees. It felt like a dance, obviously, and this quite intimate.
Did you feel a very in terms of your writing approach and yourself and Boo? Did you feel a very immediate reaction to the photographs, or did you take more time to get out? Did some just jump at you in that sense, or was it kind of?
Yeah, I mean it is. I mean, some people call it the muse, or it's inspiration, or I love the idea of it like a tug on your sleeve, just where, number one, to do this project to begin with, the idea of responding to these songs. Secondly, the idea of working with Boo, then looking at the photographs. It's a gut kind of thing where you, if you think about it too much, it probably doesn't work. But it's about, it feels almost like just a very quick, okay, that feels good. Let's go with that. And I think I've learned to understand that it's okay if it doesn't work out. It's not the end of the world. No one's going to die, But yeah. There's something about following that instinct very quickly.
Yeah.
And just going, not questioning it, not editing anything. Just go with it and let's see what happens.
It's like having that confidence of the spirit, to follow the spirit of adventure rather than kind of hold yourself back from those things, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a time to be... to really think carefully about what you're doing, but I think in creativity, particularly that first flow of ideas and spontaneity and creativity, that I think it's really important just to go with it and don't question anything. So to answer your question, Don, I think, what was the question, Phil?
I most have answered it in there somewhere.
Yeah, I'm sure we did.
I mean, there was at least 5 answers.
I think it was to do with the different tempi, is it tempi, the plural? Tempos that you choose for each song. But equally, actually, somebody else has asked a question which is relevant too. Helen Moat asked, how did you choose which photos to write music to? Presumably you had loads of photos to choose from, and you just chose the final 10 that you chose. Was it very obvious? Was there a big process of elimination? Were there some that got cast off midway through?
Yeah, definitely at the end when it came time to go to New York, it was a deadline was the cutoff point. It was the maybe we'll begin to talk about that, the idea of going to New York a year later. But for example, so what I did was I went away, looked at the photographs, lived with those for a few months. At the same time, I was reading about the different photographers. I watched the film about Alfred Stieglitz. Try to find as much as I could about the people in the photographs that I was looking at. For example, one of the things that I learned was the idea of the Kodak camera. That was a complete anathema to Alfred Stieglitz. He absolutely hated it. And when I read about it, and there was this phrase they had, "You press the button, we do the rest." And I immediately thought of writing with Neil Hannon about that particular subject, because I thought I think he would get that kind of irritation about the subject, but also I think this could have a kind of wry sense to it, which I think Neil would really get. So that was one to do with that. The two that Padraig Ó Tuama, Michael, you'd mentioned Cherry Blossom Girl. So Cherry Blossom Girl and Cloud God were both ones that that were initially Padraig's response. I sent him some of the images, and he wrote poems. Padraig's a poet, so he wrote poems based on those two ideas, and then I wrote songs based on the poems, so added lyrics and repeated and twisted things. So so part of it was from that, but ultimately it was a deadline. I felt at the time that I could have written another 3 albums, because it just felt like such a rich. It felt like a seam of gold that you discover in a mine, that you could actually just keep going with that. And then, but of course, deadline, you have to present something, and then you've gone beyond that seam, is over there somewhere, and you're on to the next thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've become a fan of a deadline over the years. You know, I used to hate them, but I've kind of grown to know myself enough to know that they're actually an essential part of the process in a strange way too, you know?
Yeah.
And I think there's a different type of energy on anything when you're getting near the end that you know you absolutely have to deliver. Sometimes it can be a very creative energy, you know?
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be horrible, there's no question, but sometimes it can really work to your benefit in the creative process, you know?
Well, tell us about because, so, okay, I would have come to you and done all these different demos just on the piano, and then said, okay, Michael, can you please score this for a string quartet, which is what I came to want to do in New York. And we'd commissioned a company in England to create like visuals, so they were going to project the images from the original photographs, or sometimes morphing into a number of images. But how was that deadline for you? I bet you did an all-nighter. You've done a few of those over the years.
Yeah, definitely have. I think most musicians have, but I think that particularly, arrangers definitely have. There's no way to finish any kind of arranging project without many man hours and person hours, because literally it's like you know, every articulation and dot has to be there. I mean, you can do a certain amount in rehearsal, of course, and if you have a good relationship with the players, and you're going to be at the rehearsal, that can really help, because you can sort of change articulations in rehearsal, and quite often you'll end up doing that anyway. You know, you rarely get your articulations and phrasing marks and things bang on. That's part of the process for every arranger, but at the same time they need to be there. Dynamics need to be there. And orchestra players or orchestral players are incredible musicians, but they like to play what's on the page as well, so it becomes part of the discipline for them to respond to what's on the page and only what's onto the page quite a lot of the time, you know. And that is the difficulty, and that's where the kind of devil is in the detail, because once you finish the notes, which are just the notes really, as I always say, and you always wish you had another 3 days just to work on your kind of articulations and dynamics and phrasings of things, but you rarely have that. You're really just getting paper together quite often, you know. And but it's late night. It's quite a lot of, you know. There was I think on in that particular week for this record, I'm pretty certain we did maybe 2 or 3 nights with you know, not in a row, but certainly there wasn't a lot of sleep, you know. And I was in that phase. I was doing an awful lot of work then. And because it was just in that era of life where you're just really like working around the clock. And but so you're sort of, you know, it's one of those things. But I had the studio beside my bedroom where I was, you know, and
that was a mistake.
I don't think I'll ever do it again. That's why I have this place hideaway now. But it's like, just waking up and, you know, I remember going in and just have a, you know, I remember on this record or these arrangements, I remember just kind of hitting playback on your Sibelius or whatever you're working on.
So and this is
Sibelius is of course the software that nearly all arrangers around the world use to create orchestral scores. It's a printing software for music notation, much like a word processor for musical parts and scores. And we would. I remember just going in, like getting up in the morning after a few hours sleep, and kind of putting on, being in your jammies with a kind of bowl of cereal, and you would sort of listen back to what you'd done the night before, because the computer could kind of play you back a little version, and you would just start going, well, maybe this should have been a B flat. And then I remember just looking, well, it's 3:30 now, and I'm still in my pajamas, and nothing has really got any better,
Yeah. Phil.
Well, I've got 3 questions about individual songs.
Okay.
Which ones you'd like to tackle? So we've got Leah McNulty, who says, just wondering what the inspiration behind Cherry Blossom Girl was. My daughter thinks it's about her, even though she was born after it came out. Her name coincidentally translates to Cherry Blossom Child, and she was born in February. Leslie Bulldog asks, is this all that matters? A little bit autobiographical as well as being about Paul Strand. And finally, George Morey asks, what is Cloud God about? So you've got 3 to choose from there.
Okay. Well, Cherry Blossom Girl in the image is of a little girl pulling a sleigh in New York. So that was the inspiration, but it's also obviously about the person that's Leah's daughter. Of course, it's about her as well, definitely. Yeah, Leslie was talking about This Is All That Matters. Is that the track? I think. Yeah. Sorry?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Yeah. The weird thing about writing about other things is that it's still about you anyway. So I'd say all of this is autobiographical, whether it's Cherry Blossom Girl or Dancing Trees or Hand of Man. It's all autobiographical to some extent. And George, you were asking about
Cloud God.
Cloud God. Yeah, so Alfred Stieglitz, towards the end of his life, became more and more obsessed with clouds, and the idea, kind of what other people said about him afterwards was that the lens of his camera went from this angle gradually to upward, looking to the skies, and he became more and more interested in just this ethereal kind of thing, and clouds seemed to suggest to him or sum up to him something spiritual in the widest sense. And so, for example, in the performances, it was an amalgamation of a lot of the photographs kind of merging into each other. And Padraig wrote the poem based on that, kind of hinting at the idea of spirituality, but also it was pretty abstract as well, I think. So yeah, that would be the influences, I think. Michael, are you going to say something, are you?
No, I'm just nodding.
Okay, you're not nodding.
I'm trying not to. Yeah, I'm just trying to nod and not interrupt the audio too much. That's reassuring nod.
Not the microphone.
Reassuring. That's great, Peter. Yeah.
So Michael, we did the we're still kind of pre-album here, so we better catch up pretty quick.
Yeah, right enough.
But so we went to New York, and you didn't have to go, and you went like it was incredible. You went so far beyond the call of like what was asked of you, but you ended up coming to New York and kind of guiding the quartet in the notes, because actually before just before we talk about that, I ended up going to South by Southwest for only the second time in my life, in between the string rehearsal, the quartet rehearsal, and then I went to Austin and then came back and we did the gig. So it was like this crazy trip I was doing, but it was Olivier Manchon.
Yes.
So Claire and the Reasons, an amazing band person. Brilliant. Couple. Olivier put together the string quartet in New York, and yeah, but it was absolutely wonderful to have you there and to kind of make sure that those details, as he spoke about, were covered.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who has the opportunity to do such a lovely project in the Met's definitely going to make the most of it, and a trip to New York is always a good thing. So it was a perfect opportunity to combine all those things. But it's yeah, I guess that's a little bit what we're talking about, and the guys were fantastic, and also it's kind of getting the chance to nuance something, particularly for the first time out. I mean, I always think it's important.
Yeah.
You have a lot of paper that you've spent hours and hours and hours, and you guys have spent hours and hours writing these fantastic songs, and it was a project that I really loved doing. Like, I really, really loved doing it, so it was a nice opportunity to go and kind of maybe finish it off in New York at that point. Well, little did we know that it wasn't actually the finish at that point,
No,
that there'd be
no.
a chapter 2
Yeah.
after this, which we're getting to, I think. But
Yeah.
but in terms of that performance, it was a lovely way for us to be there to round it off and get the opportunity to kind of final nuance. And who doesn't want to be in the Met hearing beautiful songs that you've kind of had the joy of arranging? So it was a great event for all of us that night, I think.
So, up to this point, we had no idea that this album was going to exist, that we were going to have the opportunity to work with the entire orchestra. I'd love if Paul, could we look at let's go back to Cherry Blossom Girl, and so what was originally written as a solo for the cello, in the instrumental, about 1 minute 34, I think it is, in Cherry Blossom Girl. Let's hear how that sounds with the orchestra playing it.
Cherry blossom girl, oh February flower. Cherry blossom girl.
Yeah, so it's
under your
you can hear the origins of that, when it was within the string quartet.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you expand it from the? I mean, you've spoken a little bit about that in terms of the voicings and imagining what group of instruments would play.
Yeah, I mean, one of the difficulties in this project then was coming from the fact that you have a string quartet arrangement, and what you don't want it to feel like when you get to the orchestra is that you've just tagged on some winds and brass and double basses and again, so a lot of it was there. The strings were a core feature, but some of the strings again had to be rewritten to facilitate space for brass instruments, wind instruments. It's very obvious that solo in the cello at the start of Cherry Blossom Girl, it's in the perfect register for cello, so that was always going to remain on the cello, and a group of, there's only one thing better than one cello, then it's 6 cellos. So it's kind of, a big sonorous, and it's in that kind of tenor range where your voice sits, so it kind of made sense just to keep a very sonorous kind of I suppose the word is kind of, it's like a sung melody, and it's very or cantabile, I would say, and it's very kind of so that, and then just enhanced with horns and wind in the second part of that solo, and I think those things remained from the original arrangements, and it was trying to find a way we could add another layer of complexity to the arrangements in that sense without trying to detract from those core elements, so that hopefully they still got the space that they deserved by the end, but felt embellished more than anything.
It's so interesting that instruments, like people, like there's
Exactly,
I can't get below that kind of
Yeah.
or above certain notes, and it's
Yeah.
exactly the same with instruments.
Yeah,
they are
and
like
they're-
people.
Exactly, and there's a thing, you will create a different timbre by using different range is very important, obviously, in terms of what in orchestral instruments. So, if you want something to be really, really, really kind of rich and sonorous, if you pick the range that the cello sounds most richer and sonorous in, that's why that melody goes there. And same for any instrument, it has a range that it can play, but also a range that makes most sense or is strongest. If you want to make something feel fragile, you can write an oboe and a flute at the top of its register, and it probably will sound like there'll be more air and less tone. It'll be lighter and fragile. Sometimes the notes break up, and that's sometimes a clever way to use those instruments to create more interesting and fragile textures and give over that sense of fragility in an arrangement. But if you just want something sonorous, if you have something like that cello melody right slap bang in the middle of the strongest part of the cello range, there's some Hollywood orchestrators that call that the Z clef. There's a Z clef system where they pick the ranges for the most sonorous point and try not to write outside of that for those instruments. So for those really kind of rich sonorous moments, if you write within the Z clef, as they call it, you create the strongest kind of tone, you know.
I just saw your red wine coming up.
Yeah,
there
I've switched
for
from
the first
herbal
time.
tea now. Hope that's all right with everyone. I've had enough herbal tea at this juncture. I hope everyone else is joining me. You know?
That's really interesting about the Z clef, and there's probably equally composers who choose to operate outside of those.
Yeah, exactly.
That sonorous register
Yeah, so-
to make more kind of angular or kind
Yeah,
of punky kind of sound. or
That's
whatever.
absolutely right. And, you know, in terms of kind of, 20th century composers, extremes of register became another school of thought as well, where, you have a bass clarinet playing at the top of his register can sound really superhuman or alien because
Yeah.
you've never heard it like that before.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's equally as viable. And, depending on what you're trying to achieve, and somewhere along the way you'll always try and run the gamut of all those things, I think. But, it's thinking about it that way.
Can you tell us some of the other orchestral projects you've been involved in? Because, I know for a fact that one of the first times I didn't know you at this time was I went to see a collaboration between John Cage and Merce Cunningham at the Waterfront in Belfast, and that was completely over my head at the time. I didn't know what was going on. I was going, what the hell is happening? But it was it's completely stayed with me for since then. So you were on stage operating electronic kind of manipulations of computer music during John Cage's thing.
It's been a while. It's been a long and varied road, that's for sure. And
Yeah.
I studied for a brief while on a scholarship at a place called IRCAM in Paris, where we the ensemble in Contemporary is based, and Pierre Boulez was the kind of head of school there at that time. And we would have, it would have been, electronics and electroacoustics would have been a big thing for me back then, and kind of I did perform a series of John Cage works and prepared piano, and then I did some pieces for that in electronics as well, and real-time electronics, and combining classical instruments and strange instruments, and then ended up kind of finding myself in a strange place doing, working that into different forms of music like we talked about earlier on. So yeah, it's been a huge amount, from people like, from Villagers to your Lisa Hannigan to yourself, to I worked with Stockhausen in the Barbican one day, and then in and then I could compose pieces for places like Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival and things like that. So there's an awful lot of a really varied kind of output, and then a few country gigs thrown in the middle just for joy and measure.
Phil,
A couple more questions, perhaps, before we get to the next chapter of the story. John Kane asks, the first two albums had orchestral outings in Ireland. How come Under the Dark Cloth didn't get toured with strings? Might that still happen one day? There's a thing for the two of you. Time for a reunion. And then a couple of photograph-based questions. Catherine Donovan asks, have you ever read The Ongoing Moment by Jeff Dyer, which is about Strand, Sieglitz, etc.? And who are your own favourite photographers? And finally, that's my final one. Richard Southgate asked, Peter, do you do much photography yourself? 3 questions. Remember them all.
okay, try. Well, we did do, because I'd kind of made a note of places I could remember where Under the Dark Cloth has been. So apart from New York, it was at the Waterfront in Belfast, in the BT studio as it was then, I think. I think we did it there.
With our friends, the Arco String Quartet at that point, wasn't it?
That's right. The Empire in Belfast with the Arco guys, I believe.
That's right.
The Greenbelt Festival. And I think what's amazing for me was how this project, how these songs, how the idea translated to quite places that you wouldn't have thought. So this headlined a festival in England in a big marquee with a string quartet, with loads of people standing, watching me, a string quartet, and the images behind. But there's something about the stories, about the arrangement, about the songs, about the photographs, obviously about the photographs, that communicated something. I did it in Czech Republic with a string quartet, where with an interpreter who interpreted what I said in between songs, to this twice in one day. Actually, I'm not sure you knew that, but
Yeah, I do
this big
remember
indoor place-
sending some files
You
to
did,
Prague.
because I always end up
Or
going,
somewhere
Michael,
abroad.
I'm performing this tomorrow night
I
or
forgot
tonight.
the music. Yeah.
Do you have the PDFs? Ah!
Yeah. Yes, here they are, Peter, in the email I keep for you
I'm so sorry.
in my outbox
Yeah.
with all your parts. Yeah,
Draft,
ready to go at a
go.
moment's notice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Should and a big note. Should Peter call, just send this email. You know?
Yeah, in fact, it's one of those ones that says, send now or send tomorrow.
Peter's got a gig tomorrow night. Just send it. Just send it.
Yeah. But to answer that person's question, we did it in Dublin in the Sugar Club,
We did.
with the Arco. So
Did we do it in London as well, or did you mention that there now in Walton's Music Hall? Was it the Music Hall? Or
Wilton's Music Hall, of course.
Wilton's Music Hall in
Yeah.
London. I remember
Yes.
that. That was great.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
I think we
I'm-
did two. Did we do 2 nights?
In fact, I need to find the question again, but just because, yes, Margaret Richards says, I came to hear Under the Dark Cloth at Wilton's Music Hall on the
Yeah.
30th of November 2011 and sat
Wow.
in the front row with my son, who also loves your music.
There
It was
you
the
go.
day
Well
after my
done.
60th birthday. It was a lovely way to celebrate. It will always be a special memory for me. Thank you.
No, thanks for reminding us about that. Yeah, Michael, you got that? So Wilton's Music Hall,
Yeah,
of course.
that was great. We were
That
all
was
there.
and one of my favorite venues in the world, actually.
Oh, yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, so yeah, we've done it in other places.
We have.
Phil, the other questions I can't remember at all. Please, can you?
They were both photograph related. One of them was, do you enjoy photography? And the other one was the book. Had you actually read that particular book?
I don't think I've read that particular book, actually. No. Can they put that on the? It's on the questions. If it's on the questions, maybe I can.
It's called
Okay.
The Ongoing Moment by Jeff Dyer.
Okay, I'll check that out. It's really annoying that it's increasingly annoying how short life is, because I keep wanting to explore more things in more depth and read more books. But I'll definitely look at that. And Rich, to answer your question about am I a keen photographer? Again, it's one of those things that I would love to. Would I love to do it enough to actually do it? That's the question. I do take some photographs on but it's only on my phone. So no, I've never. I remember when I was a lot younger, I would have taken photographs when I was on holiday, but they would have been of my feet by accident or a blurry kind of version of what I was intending and stuff like that. So no, it's not a forte for
So
sure.
no Paul Strand is what we're saying.
No,
Well,
well,
possibly.
maybe a Paul Strand.
Yeah.
Accidentally
feet.
Paul Strand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Whilst
feet
we're talking
nudes.
about how life is so short, Andy Bennett has asked, hi Peter, do you have a yet unrealised musical dream project or ambition?
Who's that? Andy Bennett.
It's Andy Bennett, yes.
Andy Bennett from Eastbourne.
I guess
Quite
so.
Possibly. Hi, Andy. Sorry, I'm distracted by Michael's arrangement here on Triumph of the Egg. Can I think about that as we listen to Triumph of the Egg? Paul, is that possible to, if we can increase the volume a second? Carbon, gold, and silver plates. Arabic gum, bichromate. Gelatin, potash, mercury. Insatiable bowl technology. The Bete Noir, Aristotype. Album and paper, Platinotype. Autochrome and chromium. Photogravure,
Palladium. Edison Willis, Nickel Swan, whose gnosis graced the grand salons. Talbot Vogel, Lippmann Kutz, de Monchet Lumière and brave pursuit. Consumed, possessed of bright ambition, we bless you late with recognition and mourn the passing of your art and science driven from the heart.
This is stunning, Michael. I remember walking forward. At this point in the performance of this whole record, I would have gone from the back of the stage to the front, or carried the old
Yeah.
camera,
That's right.
because this was written as a requiem to the old photographic processes. And
That's right. It's very much this part is the requiem,
yeah,
and you lay the old process to rest. Basically, it's the end of the kind of chemical age of developing, and it's kind of that's where that came from. And it's funny, weirdly a memory came to me there just as I heard that, because the bit just before that, where there's that it's nearly like a Herman, like a Bernard Herrmann, or kind of like a Hitchcockian kind of film noir moment, and then it settles into this kind of requiem. But I remember we should mention David Brophy, because
I want to talk about him. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and David Brophy was really instrumental, the conductor on those sessions, and with the brilliant RT concert orchestras ever, but I remember at that point this is exactly what we're talking about, and we're talking about articulations, because when you write something like that and you write it with lots of gaps and bars, but it also relies on the conductor. And I remember him saying, well, I'll make this a very pointed accent at the front of that, and then we'll have what we would refer to as an FP with the hairpin up. And just to explain to people what that is a 40 piano, 40s loud, piano quiet, for anyone that isn't aware of that. And it starts loud, goes quiet, and then a hairpin up is a crescendo, so it makes it louder. So that marking, you can mark that, and that's what we'd marked. But it was David's conducting that timed that so perfectly on that recording and attacked it. And it's that amazing thing you watch when you watch conductors that work and orchestras, how they work, because we as people who grew up playing in bands think about timing in a completely different way. And I just had that image of him jumping off the podium with that big boom, and then they play this kind of half a second later, everyone at exactly the right time, but it's always right behind the beat, and that always amazed me, and but I think we should give a shout out to David for his input on that, because that was one of those moments where articulation and conducting became very important, I think.
Absolutely. I have.
There you go. He's on the list.
You can see it back to front there, can you? Is it? Or
no, it's
or
actually
does mine
looks like,
looks the
it
same?
might be back to front for other people. I don't know.
It
It might
is
be
for
back
me.
to front for David. Who knows?
No, absolutely.
Yeah, we had the joy of working with David many times. That was only one of the occasions, actually, and a lot of Duke Special concerts were conducted by David Brophy. So
Yeah.
he and he's so great to work with, and he's always been a big help. He gets it as well. He's a person, a conductor who has a kind of a foot in several camps, I think, of music.
Definitely. No, he is like yourself in that respect, in terms of knowing kind of great composers and classical, inverted commas, classical music, but also knowing, in inverted commas, pop music and rock music and all the rest of it. So I remember, I think he conducted the first orchestra gig I ever did.
Yeah,
Matt
he
Foy also did, and Julie Feeney,
Yeah, that's right.
I think, in the Waterfront.
And he
Perhaps.
definitely did. I Never Thought This Day Would Come as well, did he not? The
Yeah.
wind sessions.
Yeah, he did, but he absolutely helped me understand how the two worlds could collide in a kind of meaningful way.
Yeah,
Because as you say, like in kind of normal, drums, bass, guitar, whatever, it's very much following the drummer.
On the beat, yeah.
on the beat, whereas in an orchestra with a conductor, it's with the conductor, and
Yeah.
everything is seemingly behind the beat.
Yeah,
Excuse me, but in a really wonderful way.
yeah,
And how those two worlds kind of
Yeah.
work together was very much so helpful that he was there holding those reins.
Absolutely.
I think.
yeah, for sure. And yeah, it's that kind of thing. But he definitely, and we've been lucky to work with him with many projects. But yeah, David was a big part of that record, actually, as were the RT Concert Orchestra, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, the weird thing is that record, I guess, is a hark back to the old ways of making records when you think about it, because it was all live largely, you know. And
yeah,
and,
so it was the orchestra and me at the piano.
that's right.
You were there, kind of keeping an eye on everything
Yeah.
that you'd written for the parts, and Dave Lynch was
Dave Lynch was in the box with us
recording.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and so you got 70 musicians in a room and recording live over 2 days, really, two
Yeah.
6 or 4 3-hour sessions,
And
So it's
very,
very-
very kind of
Yeah.
like there was no going over.
No,
you,
it's
you had to stay with it.
you know,
with orchestras. You have to.
people
go
are probably, whether aware or not, that the orchestras work on a very unionized time frame, so
Yeah.
if you do go over, it's a very, very costly affair. And so you do have to get everything done. So there's another example of the deadlines we talk about. But it's interesting because I think that's one of the things I enjoy about orchestras too, though, is that, well, there's no way around it. You've got to sit down and try and record something there and then, and that's what this whole record was recorded in those 2 days and 4 sessions, as a live record essentially with you and the piano and all.
Yeah. Phil, can I come back to you with Andy Bennett's
Yes,
an answer
please
to that?
do, absolutely.
So there's probably things I've omitted, but things I would still like to do is a really visceral kind of album with me and Chip. Phil, you can stay on camera, actually, if you like.
We just like your face, Phil.
Yeah.
Look at it.
I'd like to see your reaction to some of these. So,
Well, big thumbs up so far.
okay, and a visceral.
Nah, don't worry.
Yeah. If I see a sad face from Phil, I'll not do it. But
Numbers out of 10.
yeah, a kind of visceral album with Chip, just like, yeah, playing to our strengths in that respect. Obviously, ongoing theatre things. I was close to it this year, I think, with Breakfast on Pluto before everything kind of went haywire. So I think that's going to be good. But Phil sent me very kindly gave me a book. Let me get it. Actually, it's just over here. 1 second.
Is this the book about the sisters?
1 second.
Oh no, it's not. It's the other book. It's the other book.
This book here.
Yes.
Ah,
Yeah.
Sondheim.
So it's. I think probably you suspected this might be a good field for me before even I realized it might be. But so writing for theatre is something that I really want to keep going with, Andy. I'd love to make an album that's completely influenced and has the sounds of 78 RPM records. So that's something that I want to still do. I want to write like in the style of the great Denmark Street Tin Pan Alley writers, an album just of great songs, just at the piano with nothing else, no other colors or textures or anything.
kind of a Brill building album.
Yeah, just where everything stands on its own, just on the piano. And then I'd love to write probably like another Songs from the Deep Forest in terms of like a chamber pop kind of thing that really works with orchestra and just that highlights all those things. That's 1, 2, theatre, maybe give me 5 of those. For the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe another 10 really good records. I'd be up for doing that.
Well, that's 2021 taken care of. What are we doing in 2022? In the questions, a lot of the questions that I think are interesting are moving away from the album, so I'm going to keep them to the end. So let me know
Okay.
when you're ready for them. But
Okay.
before I go back into my box, I've got something that I'd just like to see Michael's reaction to, if that's all right. Randall Higgins says the following.
Hey, Randall.
Hey, Randall.
He says the following, and profanity alert. I just want to ask Michael, do you have any idea of how much of a fucking genius you are?
Well, that's very kind of Randall, and I love his phrasing. I couldn't possibly agree or begin to understand the idea. But if he wants to petition for that to be put on my gravestone after I'm long gone, that would be lovely, wouldn't it? I love the idea of people visiting. Oh, what a fucking genius! Basically, that would be great. Guardian obituary. What a fucking genius! Full stop. So I can't imagine. You're very kind, Randall. I can't imagine that's true, but I appreciate the sentiment.
Michael, I love the fact that who were you on tour with when was Cloud God? Because Hannah Peel, our good friend, has played this.
Yeah.
Was it
That's
on Radio
right.
3 or
Yeah.
or BBC Six?
I think she did a couple. Hannah does a show on Radio 3 called Night Tracks, and she also did a series
Hannah.
recently. Yeah, on Radio Ulster as well, featuring orchestral music and stuff. And things. She played Cloud God on there, and I know that Hannah loves that song and that track. But there probably is an interesting story about this record that is so out to lunch, because in the weird twist of fate of all the weird things that somehow I found myself in the middle of, I remember being on a tour bus in Australia with NXS, and because our mutual friend Kieran Gribben became involved with the NXS, and as we know, and Kieran was
Amazing man.
yeah, and he's a huge fan of Peter's work and what he always was, and so he remember said, well, what are you working on? I said, well, I just finished this record called Under the Dark Cloth with Peter. He said, oh, that sounds amazing, can you send it over to me? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. So I sent it over to Australia, and he puts it on in the NXS tour bus, and they become obsessed with it. But weirdly, they love Cloud God and Irish Washerwoman, which are two extremes of that record, I think, in many ways, And then I remember driving through sort of Australia, and they were playing to like 80,000 people in kind of Wollabooga or whatever, wherever we were. I'm sorry to any Australian people out there, but we were somewhere completely, I can't remember. And it did sound like that. But I remember on the way home, Andrew, who wrote all the hits like Need You Tonight and all those Never Tear Us Apart, and along with Michael Hutchins, and he puts on Under the Dark Cloth and just raves about Irish Washerwoman and Cloud God, and that's that, and I was thinking
They are quite extreme.
yeah, and this is a really strange moment in my life. Somehow I'm on a tour bus with NXS, singing the Irish Washerwoman and Cloud God.
Rub it up, rub it up. The reason, by the way, that Ruby Murray is the EP is in the background is because obviously you had done the orchestrations for
That's right.
for the Ruby Murray concerts and also for Harry Nielsen.
That's right. We did the Harry Nielsen concerts as well. Yeah.
So I'm thinking maybe next week when I'm performing this record, I might do maybe a song or two from each of those kind of projects as well. Yeah, I think Michael, unless there's anything else you'd like to say, we're getting towards the end.
I think we've obviously covered it in a comprehensive and structured manner.
So Phil, now is probably a good time if you have other questions.
Well, there's such a varied selection.
Bring it
I'll
on.
give you three, and you pick the ones that you'd like to
Okay.
answer. Emma Assin asks, what adventures you had in New York, and did you have your favourite spots there? Christopher Willoughby asks, what would be your dream band lineup to support a future album? Members present and deceased, and why?
Oh,
And
that's
a
not
little
bad.
bit more seriously, and Andy Bennett asks, I see many musician friends highlighting the struggles many are having with regard to the change to streaming. Have you, and maybe Phil, any insight as to how this might be affecting the up-and-coming music generation? Three completely different questions, I'm afraid, there.
Wow.
But,
What was the second one? The second one again, please.
second one was about what
Dream
band
lineup.
you put together of a fantasy band that you'd love
Oh,
to alive or dead.
that's really difficult. Venues in New York, Michael,
Venues in New York. Well,
or
I guess
hangout places.
hangout places. I remember the Bowery was always a hangout for most people, and most people who know music in New York will always have ended up in the Bowery at some point, whether it's the ballroom or the little Bowery off to the side. And I had some good nights there with various musicians and people. And I remember being in One of the favourite hangouts I had was, we're going back to our friend Foy, but we launched his record, The Joy of Nothing, in Electric Lady Studios in New York, Jimi Hendrix studio, of course. But I remember being on the rooftop terrace, doing a launch party that night in a very sunny New York. So who wouldn't like doing that, I think? And we played some songs live in the studio that night. I always liked it there. So yeah, New York. Who doesn't like New York? And of course, the Met was fun. That was good fun. What about you? Did you have a favourite place in New York?
A kind of unexpected place was the Duplex, which was like a piano bar in I think again maybe Lower East Side. But it was a friend had brought us to the Duplex after a gig somewhere else. And it was one of those places where, okay, and now Ken from the kitchen is going to get up and sing something from Les Miserables. and Ken,
Amazing.
Still wearing his chef outfit, would get up and have the most stunning voice you've ever heard. And so that was incredible. And then leaving there at about 2 a.m, he said, oh, you think that was good? Let's go to this other place. And then we went down stairs into this other venue, which, is really late by this stage, and there's maybe 15 people around an acoustic piano. Not only are they singing songs from musicals, but they're also singing saying the dialogue in between. So it was like this, incredible kind of thing. So that was pretty cool. Phil, do you want to say something about streaming? It does feel incredibly unjust, the amount that artists get from streaming and downloads and stuff. I don't know if that's something we fight, or is it something we just have to accept?
Well, this is where
elaborate on or adjust to.
It can get very technical, so I'll be a broad brushstroke. But I'm a bit of a defender of streaming, and I think that the maths actually does show that the amount that is gathered into the pot and then goes out to songwriters and singers and artists is actually a lot greater than people think. It's just that it lasts throughout a lifetime.
But not 0.006p for a stream. Like, where does all the rest of that go, Phil?
There isn't a rest of that. The thing is that if you think about the fact that with all of the money that comes in, the problem is that 40,000 songs are being released every day. So the amount of music that people are streaming is going to literally thousands more artists, or thousands times more artists than ever were before. There are some problems. Problems with things like music becoming very functional, so people like their playlists and they like things that they can go to the gym to or relax to, and don't necessarily listen to albums with their full concentration in the way that they used to. But certainly I can, and now is not the right time, but I can actually do the maths to show that actually the amount that artists and writers get per stream is actually, once you look at a lifetime of listening, ends up generally being more money than you get from the purchase of a CD or a vinyl album. The idea of looking at the per stream amount isn't the best way of looking at actually how things work. It's that thing of, over the lifetime, how much are you earning from that record compared with that one purchase? You'll never get any money from that person again. They can listen to that for free forever. It's a really different system. Obviously, the other good thing about streaming is that it has saved us from piracy. There were about 6 or 7 years where we thought that nobody would ever make money from recording again. No one would ever make an ambitious, expensive to make, or an album that took a long time to make ever again, because there would be no way of earning from it. So we are in this difficult transition period, but I find myself a lot actually defending streaming. There are definitely inherent problems with it. The superstars get far too much money. The top, I think, 3% get 90% of the money. We don't like that, but that's not a problem with streaming. That's a problem with something else.
What is it a problem with? You haven't identified.
Who do we have to talk to, Phil? And can we get them on the line? That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll get Ed Sheeran and Drake on the line now.
Yeah.
I think the whole way that technology, the whole way that YouTube and these other things will actually the technologies will point us to the most successful things. That's sadly how all of the data systems work. and all the analytics work. There's a big problem with that, but that's not the fault of streaming. And sadly, actually, the more that we're given a huge amount of choice, and let's think in the olden days we could just play the 20 records on our shelf. Now we can play the 20 million songs on Spotify. We often have the paralysis of choice. We go, if I've got 20 million songs to play, I'll just listen to those 3 that I can remember at the top of my head. So there's all sorts of
Which
things
are probably on your shelves anyway.
which are probably on yours. So there are problems. By no means. Unfortunately, the biggest problem, of course, is lockdown. Why we're here now. Yesterday, the entire music industry came together with a big campaign called Let the Music Play. Luckily, some of the really big stars, some of the really big companies are starting to get behind it and hopefully to get the government to listen, because we may be, without wanting to put a big downer on the ceiling, we may be in this position for another 6 months. And if we are, and if we don't get 50 million from the government, there will be no small venues or even medium-sized venues to play. The live thing is a much bigger issue in my opinion than the streaming.
Well, I Phil for president.
Yes.
I absolutely
Vote Phil in November.
Yeah. No, I really value your opinion in these things.
Yeah.
In terms of the backing band, for me, it would be ABBA as the core of the musicians. Frank Zappa and Paul Pilot on guitars, Tom Waits on piano, Chip and Phil on drums, Ben Castle on clarinet, saxophone, Michael Keeney doing the arrangement, and David Brophy conducting us all.
Well, that's a pretty serious band.
Yeah, I think I think that would be pretty good. And I'd pay money to see that.
There's so many nice people in that band that would never make it on the stage, because everyone would be like, no, after you, no, you go. no, I insist. So we'd all just be stuck in the dressing room for hours while Phil tried to shove us on.
Backing vocals, Polyphonic Spree,
and
Shaka Khan, and I do lead vocals, and I
think if we could keep the ABBA jumpsuits for everyone, that'd be good. Just kind of a general ABBA theme.
Okay, I like it.
Yeah, just in terms of dress.
It remains for me to say thank you very much, Michael Keeney.
Thank you. What a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having us along.
I'm aware also that the pub's open tonight in Belfast and in the north of Ireland.
And in my studio.
In your studio and in mine.
Just my pub for one.
But I'm hoping lots of people will see this online as we go along. And please come along next week. And I'll be performing Under the Dark Cloth in its entirety, with perhaps the exception of Triumph of the Egg. We'll have to talk about that.
It's a tricky one.
But we'll figure something out. But thank you to Paul and Jay, to Phil, to Michael,
Phil.
And everyone
thank you, Peter.
coming
Thank you, Phil.
in.
Thank you, Paul and Jay.
And I'll read the comments after. Thank you
Great.
very much.
Fantastic. See you next week. As you say.
I'm determined not to do the waving, Paul or Phil, as apparently everyone does this. I'm going to do it. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.